All right, guys, welcome back to I Spit on Your podcast, where we like to talk shit about really good horror movies. Today we're covering Hereditary. That was my pick for the poll last week, and we're going to start things off. We'll get started here with a little bit of what the movie is about, and then we're going to get into just completely shitting all over this movie. If you guys are ready, let's get started. So Hereditary basically follows the Graham family after the grandmother of the family ends up passing away. And they find out that the grandmother was into some really dark shit and ends up uncovering a whole bunch of cult shit throughout the movie. So the movie follows the family as these things unravel, and we get to a point where shit gets real hectic. So that's a rundown. So, Sean, what were your initial thoughts?
I initially thought, "What the fuck is this movie?" The very first time I watched it, I think it's so many just different moving parts that you definitely need to watch it 2 or 3 times just to kind of understand what's going on, what's happening, the cause and effects, and everything. I will say the very beginning, the entry scene where you see one of her houses that she built, and it zooms in, and you see her son sleeping in bed, and her Alex sleeping in bed, and her husband comes in to wake him up. I thought that was such a neat scene because it kind of, in my opinion, it makes it seem like there's something bigger than what we're going to be watching. Where the camera had to zoom in to show us this is what you're going to be watching, but as it zooms in, there's things happening outside of what we're going to see. So I thought that was pretty cool. I liked that there was more going on than just what you saw in each scene and in the camera. You had to remember things, you had to keep things going. I really appreciated that. I thought that this movie was absolutely fucking crazy. It's got one of the most tense scenes, probably the most tense scene or 5 minutes that I've ever watched in a movie. I don't have anxiety or anything like that, but I felt like I thought my mom was going to yell at me, when Toni Collette starts screaming in the daytime. But we'll get there. I think that they did put too many ingredients in the cake, personally, for my taste, but that doesn't mean that this was bad by any means.
All right, not bad. That was actually a lot better than I thought coming from you. Justin, what were your initial thoughts?
Yeah, mine actually are pretty similar to Sean. I remember I saw this in theaters with my sister when it came out. And I remember everyone was hyping it up as like the next greatest or the scariest horror movie since The Exorcist or whatever. And, I'm like, that's a pretty big title to put on something. But I remember going into it, watching it, and, certain obvious scenes like make your jaw drop and you're like, holy shit. Like, and you sit through the whole thing and you just feel like stuck sitting there for a minute, like trying to digest everything you just watched, and you're just like, holy fuck, like, whoa, what all just happened in front of me, which is cool. And then like you can watch it over and over and over and like piece things together totally differently and totally contradict things you thought before. And kind of like Sean mentioned too, that intro sequence, I really like how he put it, where it like zooms into the house, whereas it's like the whole thing is like a diorama, and like we're watching that. Like, it's almost like from that whole perspective from the get-go, we're in Payman's like subconscious watching this whole thing. Because I mentioned too, it's interesting how we start by looking at the treehouse, and then we pan like into the house, zoom in right into Peter's room, and like immediately you connect the treehouse to Peter. And like that's where it starts, and like that's where also the whole thing ends. Like, it comes completely full circle of like that. Here's the treehouse, here's Peter, and then at the end, like they're totally combined because he's in the treehouse as like the king. So I thought that was really cool. And then there's like throughout the whole thing, there's like all sorts of little things that we'll get into that I found really interesting and cool from like story perspective, as well as like the, as Sean likes to put it, kind of the smarty pants academic perspective that I have. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think it's really good and strong.
Well, I guess the one thing we can all agree on is that opening scene was probably one of, you know, the better opening scenes out of a lot of movies that have come out in recent years. You know, the whole cinematic aspect of it and going in and just basically you're seeing, you know, here's the movie and this is what you're getting yourself into. And I like how they kind of started off showing, you know, the grief and everything from the family because the grandmother just died. It didn't start off showing the grandmother died like she's already dead. Mm-hmm. Like how Ari Aster just completely skipped that and went right into it and was like, bam, you guys are in for a suspenseful movie. And then the amount of jaw-dropping scenes in the movie were just absolutely phenomenal too. You know, my first watch through, you know, I same thing with you guys. It's just like, what the fuck did I just get myself into? And then as you kind of start watching it more and more and more, you kind of like start picking up on new things and, you know, you kind of realize certain aspects of it. And, you know, like my first watch through, I always wondered, I was like, why is, you know, at the end of it, why is Peter, you know, clicking like Charlie was? And then once I got X amount, you know, into, you know, my number of watches, I kind of was like, oh shit, that makes sense. You know, finally all starts clicking. So that's one of my favorite parts is that it just, there's so much to it. And there's so much into it where, you know, you first watch through is great. You're sitting there and you're just like one of the family members and you're like, what the hell is going on? You don't know what's going on. You're just watching all these events unravel. You're like, why the hell is this happening? You have no clue. And then next thing you know, shit hits the fan. Mm-hmm. And it's already too late to kind of solve any of it. And that's why this will probably top 5 horror movies for me, you know, because of the suspense for it. You know, I haven't watched a movie like this that's invoked so much emotion and, you know, made me want to actually, like, devote time into, like, understanding it completely. You know, just because, like I said, there's so much shit in it that you can watch it countless times and still get numerous, you know, different things from it.
I feel like this isn't a horror movie. I feel like it's a trauma movie, but
that's basically how you feel after the scene with Charlie. You know, well, you know, we all know the one I'm talking about. You know, you're kind of just like, okay, yeah, this is just going to be one of those fucked up movies. It's just going to fuck me up at the end of it. So, you guys want to get into some talking points now?
Yeah, I actually want to say something too. Me and Tyler have this weird little thing. We'll kind of both watch a movie because obviously we live states apart. We'll both play a movie at the same time and be messaging each other. Oh, hey, I like this. Oh, hey, I like this. Oh, hey, did you see that? And one of the things that I, you know, always think about in this movie is we were actively doing that. And the scene where Annie shuts the light off in her office, her project room, whatever you want to call it. And she looks over to the side and you see a silhouette of her mother. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I really liked about that, Tyler couldn't see it. Tyler didn't see it. We had to rewind and pause it so that he could see it. Because he was just like, I feel like she's there, but I feel like she's not there. And that always, since he said that, that's always sat with me because that's how I feel like this movie is. You know, he did a very great job of letting you experience this movie through whatever character was on screen. So when Annie's on screen and she sees her mom, but she doesn't see her mom, but she's kind of there, but isn't she there? It's like you're sitting there like, well, we know her mom's on her mind very heavily. You know, she's very broken up about her mom being gone, the traumatic relationship that they had, the rocky relationship that they had. And you're sitting there, and I felt like Annie. I'm like, is that her mom? That's not her mom. She's imagining it. Is she really there? Like, it's so cool that I felt that with her. Like, you know, and I really appreciate too, with Ari Aster, how, like I said, with every character that's on screen, he almost changes how the movie is because these characters are all experiencing and feeling different things while going through very similar things. So I just wanted to point that out before we moved on.
Yeah, the thing about that too is, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna touch on that as well. And so because I made a note of that too, of how like her ghost spirit is still like lingering on, whether she's like actually there or not there. You know, because like she sees her, but she doesn't see her, and then you constantly are seeing little images of her figurine in the houses that her Annie's building, and then like with the idea of her spirit still lingering, like you see like the cult followers are still lingering in the house, like the ones breathing outside looking in Peter's room, and like you know that they've been in their house before, like doing all sort of like sneaky shit. So it's kind of cool, like you have this idea of like, is she there, or is like, are there other people there? Are they all there? Is it like spirit? Is it like actuality? You kind of have like this weird thing. And then eventually, you know, you find out that like, oh shit, her body has probably been in the attic for the whole time without them knowing, because early on you find out about the grave being desecrated and her body dug up, and you don't find the corpse up there until forever. And I mean, there are so many flies and shit that she's probably been up there the whole time. So like, then you see the spirit and you're like, okay, well, like maybe her body's been there the whole time, so maybe there's this weird spirit presence she's having too. So it's like such a little like tiny flash of something, but like holds so much weight.
Yeah, the body being the attic thing too. They hint throughout the whole movie because you hear them complaining about a smell coming from the house. Like one of the scenes where Steve comes and picks Peter up from school, I think after his first meltdown, after Charlie, they walk in and they're taking off their shoes and stuff, and he goes, "Oh, there's that smell." And and then later on in the movie, you find out that the smell is the body, and that's where all those flies are coming from. So that's one thing that I love about Ari Aster too, is he's very good at keeping things very subtle, and then showing you like, okay, that was actually a significant part of the movie later on through it. And I noticed he did that with this and Midsummer.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool set design in it too, where like that kind of goes along with that. Like, did you see it or didn't? There's a lot of times too where like things are set up a certain way that it looks like there's almost like people lingering. Like I remember there's a scene, I think it's right after the accident happens when Peter finally comes home. Like it almost looks like to me at one point in one of the windows that there's like a person standing in the window kind of like looking out watching him. And then like you have the dark corners of his room where he thinks he sees Charlie, but it's just like the sweatshirt. Like there's a lot of these really cool like set design pieces where it looks like there's people like in the dark corners, but in actuality it's it's just everyday objects. Like when I was watching this specifically, I put it on a smaller screen that had a better resolution, like as close to me as this laptop, so that like I could see the better angles, like with no glare or any of that, so I could like actually look for like the hidden stuff he puts in. Like how like the one thing is too, like when Toni Collette's up in the corner of his room towards the end there, like it takes you a few times to notice she's actually there before she goes like swimming across the wall in the room when she exits. But like half the time you're like the first time I watched it, I had no idea she was up there. I was like, holy shit. So like there's a lot of really cool hidden stuff that like if you're not really paying attention to what's going on, you're gonna miss all this stuff. But like the more and more you watch it, the more and more you piece it together, like the more scary it gets and the more it makes sense. So it's like really cool. You have like this weird cult uneasy presence, whether it's actually there or it's not.
Yeah, one about the set pieces too is before they go to the party and they're driving up that road, they drive past the pole that Charlie ends up getting struck by, and you see zooms in, and in that scene you can see the payment symbols on the pole. And then later on at the party, when they go up to the room to smoke, The kids actually, I don't know if you guys caught this or not, but on the laptop they're watching a video of a guillotine dropping. So the whole time they're foreshadowing that this is about, Charlie's about to get her shit rocked, and that I love the little subtle things like that. And actually, on my last watch through, when I watched it the other day, just to kind of refresh myself on it, I was watching that scene and actually paying extra close attention. And when her head actually hits that pole, you can see the payment symbol on the side of it. You can see a little glimpse of it, like basically right where her head hits is right where that symbol was. So it's like the whole time it's like, well, shit, was this whole entire thing planned to like end like this?
Mm-hmm.
So, you look and you see there's this dead deer smack dab in the middle of the road to make him swerve right in front of that pole. So the whole time going through the whole movie, you could definitely tell there's a cult presence the entire time that's just been watching the Graham family for, even after the grandmother passed away. Like they're just constantly there. They're constantly setting these events in motion so they can end up getting to their end goal of providing the male host.
Yeah, I touched on that too, because I was like, it was really interesting to me that like, Charlie was supposedly Payman, but she died so quickly, and that all of a sudden Peter becomes Payman, and then like, was this whole decapitation thing planned? And like, if so, why didn't they just work out something simpler or sooner or easier? Why did they stage this really weird, elaborate like decapitation part for it? And then, which also made me think too, when she was at the party, I found it interesting that she didn't ask about the cake, whether or not it had nuts. But like earlier in the film, when they're at the funeral, she has the chocolate bar and her parents are like, oh, did you make sure that has nuts? And she's like, yeah, I made sure. So it's like, that's interesting that like she was precautious earlier, but now she goes into this setting and she's not really thinking about it. I was like, I wonder if that's like, now that Payman has more possession over her, he's kind of like it's less her kind of in control, where like, if a person had an allergy, they'd more be concerned about it, whereas like if someone's possessing you, they don't really act as you, like in those sorts of ways. I thought that was kind of an interesting deep dig of like, they raised that question earlier about her paying attention, and then suddenly she isn't, and then they plan this crazy decapitation.
So yeah, I kind of thought throughout that scene, I kind of just chalked her not asking about the chocolate, because that was one of the things that I thought of too, but I kind of just chalked it up to she's in an unfamiliar setting, an uncomfortable setting, so she probably just went and got the cake, didn't ask any questions, right, just got out of there. That's what I chalked that up to. But yeah, it's kind of like I when I was doing my research on this film, one of the things I came across, they talked about how it would have been a lot more simple to do what you said, just kind of, instead of doing this whole elaborate thing, just go ahead and just cut her head off, and then we'll let the body possess Peter. But what they pointed out is that they needed to create tension between the family, because they needed all of the, all these things to land into place. So by them kind of staging these things and staying hidden in the background, they're able to cause tension between the family and get it so, they're all in a weaker state, so the possession can happen more naturally. That's kind of why, like, when you see Annie freaking out during the seance, she was already like desperate to kind of talk to Charlie, and she's already kind of freaked out, I guess you could say, but not freaked out. So you kind of, that's what causes her to get possessed, really, because she has that dread and that tension building up in her. And then when her and Peter snap, it just kind of starts laying everything out in plain sight for him. That's kind of how that whole thing was supposed to, play out. Is just all of these events happen to cause attention in the family and get everybody to kind of start being at each other's throats, so they don't don't recognize what's going on around them.
So there's 2 points that I want to cover real quick. The first one is just taking a quick step back and talking about how we appreciate like the subtle things that were hidden in the movie and all that stuff. The one thing that I didn't like was the few scenes where you saw cult members just out in the open waving to the family. I didn't like that, just because I thought it would have been creepier to have these people. I thought it would have been creepier to see these people repeatedly passing by, you know, the Grahams in the store, or in school, or walking down the street, or whatever. I thought that would have been creepier, but like, wait a minute, I feel like she's familiar, or he's familiar. I don't like personally when just out in the open they're waving, because it's almost, the movie's almost like, hey, this is creepy, isn't it? Well, no, what's creepy is when you're hiding them in the shot, or when you're making me look for them because I don't know that they're there and the family doesn't know they're there. But to then further your point, or to move on to the next point, that whole driving scene, the reason why I didn't like it was because I thought, holy shit, this has to be planned. And I thought that was just a bunch of bullshit, because there's no way that you can plan, we're going to put a deer here, he's going to perfectly swerve at this moment, her head's going to be out that window, and it's going to knock the pole. Perfect, this plan's in motion. And if that is what they thought, then I don't like that type of shit, because there's never been a plan that's worked that perfectly. So what I did was I looked up Payman, because I just wanted to see what we were going to deal with in this movie. And interestingly enough, King Payman's powers include knowledge of past and future events, clearing up doubts, making spirits appear, creating visions, acquiring and dismissing servant spirits, reanimating the dead for several years, flight, remaining underwater indefinitely, and general abilities to make all kinds of things and all sorts of people at the behest of the magician. So, with that understanding, going into these final two watches of the movie, because I watched this movie twice before we got into this, I wonder how much of this shit really fucking happened. I wonder if there was a deer in the road. I wonder if there were nuts in the cake. I wonder the voices that Annie thought she heard. I wonder if she did. The visions that were going on in the brother's head while he's at school and all that stuff. Did that really happen? Like, how much of this movie was real? Sorry, Peter. I don't know why that slipped my mind. But how much of this movie is real and like actually happened, and how much of this shit is just non-existent? And I think that for me is what made this movie better. Because now I'm sitting there like, I don't know if this is really happening. I don't know what's going on. I don't know who the fuck Payman's possessing right now. I don't this, I don't that, you know, blah, blah, blah. Reanimating the dead. How do we know Grandma really wasn't alive in that first shot? How do we know her body was in the house? How do we know that she was not there? We don't. You know, when, you know, at the end, Annie's cutting her head off. Did that really happen? Or did Payman make Peter see that happen so that he would, you know, continue on his downfall of emotion? When Steve lights on fire, did Annie throw the book in the fire, or did she throw Steve on the fire? Like, all of this shit just makes me wonder what did happen, what didn't happen. And I think that makes for a way better viewing than just my initial first couple of viewings.
Yeah, looking into Payman too, I did the same thing. I watched it twice myself, but I looked a little more into Payman these last few times, and I found out the same exact stuff, and I was just like, oh shit, you know, now I kind of understand why these people kind of worship him, and it's just nuts watching all this shit happen. So like, I imagine the deer in the road could have been an illusion that Payman made happen, you know, so that these scenarios could happen. You know, he put Charlie's head out the window, so when Peter swerved, bam, I hit that pole where his symbol was. You know, because basically, looking more into it, the grandmother actually, her name's Ellen. Ellen, if you listen to the movie, she kind of like forced herself into, you know, being a mother figure to Charlie. So it was her last opportunity to really get Payman into a host's body. So, you know, you hear Annie talking about how when Charlie was born, her mother wouldn't let Annie breastfeed her, and Ellen breastfed her herself. And then you go and you look into later on in the movie when Annie's looking through her shit and she finds the pictures of, the cult shit going on, them being, her Ellen being showered in gold. Basically, those are symbols of her being married to Payman. So that's why she spent so much time trying to get Payman into her son, into her husband. And then she didn't have a chance to try to get Payman to possess Peter. Payman needs a male host to actually be full-blown, king of hell. So she was able to weasel her way back into the family, get Charlie possessed, and that's why she was like breastfeeding her, and like basically she's breastfeeding her husband, Payman's Ellen's husband. So like she gets so attached to Charlie, so Payman is actually in Charlie. And at the end of the movie, when you hear Joan, calling Peter Charlie, she explains, "You're Payman. Payman needed the male host, blah, blah, blah." So, like, Charlie is Payman, basically. So I have a feeling that, Payman kind of twisted Charlie's mind to do, like you said, to kind of eat the chocolate cake without her asking questions, kind of made her feel that way, and then made all these events happen around them, which killed the female host, freeing Payman's, spirit to be able to possess and attach itself to Peter. Basically, that's what happens after Charlie dies. Payman leaves her body and attaches himself to Peter until he's in a weakened enough state to be able to be fully possessed. Which that's why, like, leading up to the end scene, you see him actually get possessed once he jumps out the window. So that's when he's at his weakest.
Well, see, that's the for me personally, that's the biggest issue that I have with this movie, is the whole Payman possession. I think that it raises too many questions, too many thoughts, and it's not strong or solid for me. Like, what is it exactly that had Charlie be possessed? And, I appreciated the fact that Payman's in a female, and so he's not going to be the strongest he can be. And there were times where Charlie just kind of like would be possessed by him, and you could kind of tell that she was in a different state. And they were like, oh, she's just autistic or something like that. Well, no, she's possessed. But okay, so then when she dies, for me personally, and I guess I'm wrong, I honestly thought Payman went to Annie, because, when Annie's slicing her head off or whatever, I thought that was like a final shot. But again, you could be right because of the whole light flickering thing, and that seemed to be his signal when he would be possessing over you or something like that. I just felt like it was weak, and such a strong, detailed, careful movie to not really let us know or give us insight on that, I personally feel like is weak, and it's a pretty big flaw for me. I would have liked to know how he attached and how he possessed and how he overcame. If you're saying, oh, well, if you're emotionally or physically weak, he can just possess you. That for me just isn't enough. I'm sorry. And, maybe that's me asking too much, but that's definitely a negative for me in this overall movie.
Well, when it comes to demon possession, that's basically how all demon possession goes. You can't just go into a strong host right away. You got to kind of, most of the time it's depicted as them being put into a weaker state. So the demon is able to just jump right in. But what's cool about, what I like about it, and what you probably don't, is they built up to showing how much work actually went into creating them and getting them into these weakened states so they can actually, like, possess them. Completely. That's kind of where that's where I like it the most. Is you see them working their way up to beating this family down to the point where they're all to this super weakened state, and they're just able to be possessed like nothing. So if you look at Annie, when Annie got possessed, she like freaked out, and then all of a sudden she just right away, because she just watched her husband get lit on fire. So it's kind of like you see these events happen, so then that kind of makes it, the whole being possessed by being in a weaker state, makes it a little better because you see the amount of effort that actually went into getting them to be possessed.
Right, but my thought process is, so they have to be emotionally vulnerable or physically vulnerable, and if they're either, there's how many people with mental illnesses in the world that are free game? Why doesn't he just possess one of those people? Or there's how many people, you go to a hospital and there's how many injured people or vulnerable people? Why not just take any of them? This cult is pretty big. There's more than enough people in this cult. I'm sure they could have found somebody who was worthy enough or whatever, willing enough to take on payment rather than go through, hey, let's, Ellen's going to die and then Charlie's going to get decapitated and then everybody's going to be an emotional roller coaster and then we're going to light Steve on fire and then we're going to possess Annie for about 15 minutes, cut her fucking head off, and then we get to be with Peter. Like, if it was Peter that was the end goal the whole time, then what is it specifically about Peter that made him, only him, the ideal target host? That and if you can answer that, then I will completely give it all to you. But that's what I continue to ask myself every time I watch this movie.
I think what it is with Peter, it's with the family. How I said earlier that Ellen was married to Payman, right? So because she was married to Payman, doesn't it make sense to possess somebody within that bloodline? These events, he's already possessed Charlie. He just needs to be able to get out of Charlie's body into the male host. The closest thing to Payman is, basically the closest thing to Charlie that he can get to a male host is Peter. He's not going to possess Steve. He's old. He wants to get it, into a young, strong host. So that's why it's kind of like, it makes sense to go after family.
I mean, yeah,
that's what it is. It comes down to it's bloodline,
If she tried with her husband and it failed, she tried with her son and it failed. I mean, at some point, I would be like, we have to try something new.
Well, the thing is with Annie says early when she's at that first clinic that her brother committed suicide and left notes saying that the mother, that Ellen, was trying to put people inside him.
Right.
So he killed himself before actually allowing Ellen to possess him. And then I'm assuming the same thing happened with the husband. I didn't really get into the husband, her husband at all. But another thing is they kind of made it seem like, how when Annie would go into her sleepwalking state, she'd be saying what's on her mind and stuff. That's basically like her subconscious trying to protect her. So like when she separated herself from her mom, she wasn't, it didn't come down, in her mind, it wasn't actually because she was, in a cult and trying to work to something. She knew something was going on. So she separated herself to keep Peter away, but then failed at keeping Peter away by allowing her to get close to Charlie again.
So my thought, I'm sorry, Justin, you look like you were about to say something.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to kind of go and say, well, why Peter's kind of the weakest best choice there. I mean, like Nate mentioned, her husband and her son, Ellen's son, both rejected the concept because, I mean, they kind of saw what was coming. So you kind of get stuck. Peter's the left one. If you really think about it, though, like, Peter is like the weakest character in the entire fucking movie. I mean, he's presumably in high school. When I was in high school, I didn't call my mom mommy. I didn't get as emotional as he did. I mean, he's constantly using drugs to try to escape his life and all that. I mean, like, he's emotionally extremely weak in this movie. I'm not saying it's a bad thing overall, but if you look at it, like, he's such a weak-willed character, and like, he has like no strength to him at all, that he makes the absolute perfect candidate out of anyone to be possessed by someone else, because he's going to show such little resistance to it. I mean, throughout the whole thing, he didn't try to resist anything happening to him. He just got scared of everything, but he didn't try to put up any fight or whatever. He just like freaked out and was scared and horrified and cried for his mommy and all sorts of stuff. So, I mean, kind of, again, he's in that family role because Ellen's already married to Payman, so she's trying to keep someone familiar that she's already worked with. And, you know, Charlie was there just because she was able to get her claws in her. The mother, again, she's also female, but is also super extremely resistant to her mother. And then you have, which leaves you with the weak-willed Peter, who they also mentioned that he would make a good host because he's young and he's healthy. He really doesn't have anything wrong with him. So it'll give Payman like a body to inhabit for a long period of time. So that's the way I kind of see it. It's just like Peter was just such like a weak-willed, emotional wreck that like a higher force could manipulate him easily into taking total control of him.
Yeah, I mean, neither one of you are wrong, and I agree with what your thoughts are. I just feel like, I personally just, I guess I don't appreciate the execution of it all, because Peter's only 3 years older than Charlie, and if Charlie was so easy to possess with Payman, well, why wasn't Peter? If Grandma was around for 13 years of his life, I'm sure there were plenty of chances for her to have, put Payman in him. If she got that close to Charlie, I'm sure she had opportunities to babysit Peter, and it never came to fruition. And I mean, your explanation in itself kind of, in my eyes, contradicts this whole rest of the movie. Like, if Peter's already weak and not strong and just easy, then why wasn't he just possessed from the beginning? But I mean, I guess I don't want to just keep going in circles. I appreciate both of your answers. I just personally, I didn't like the execution is all.
Yeah, that's because he sucked, though.
Well, if Ari Aster put enough effort into like ironing out the entire movie and not just certain scenes, like it would have been, I think this would probably be the best movie I've seen ever.
Yeah.
The problem is, though, is you don't want to suffer from over-explaining everything. He kind of wanted to leave things open for people to imagine and come up with like shit like this, like give people things to discuss and question and go. I mean, he didn't want to say this happened because of this. He does this because of this. This person can do this. Like you kind of get really bland if you over-explain everything and make everything so cut and dry. So, I mean, I get your point where it would be nice to have a little bit more explanation on some things, but like if this movie were more like A, B, C, D, like everything laid out and why it happened, I don't think it would be nearly as good as people see it.
Yeah, that's one thing that's really good about Ari Aster is he puts enough information in there so you get what happens, but he leaves enough out to where you might have to look some things up to actually fully understand what happened. It gives that a little bit of like mystery and makes you actually think about the movie instead of just being like, oh, that was a good movie, and then you never, to think of it again. Hereditary is a good movie because it sparks a discussion. Like what we're doing right now.
I think Hereditary is a good movie because it has such shock value. I think that it's such a good movie because, like this is a family with family issues. We've all had some sort of family issues in our life, so anybody can relate to that. Not everybody has had a sibling pass away, but we've all had somebody pass away, like, the grandma. And so we can all appreciate it to an extent. All of these characters are so different that at least part of us can connect to one of them and understand. I wanted to bring this up because I'm very interested in what both of you think, but I want to go to that dinner scene where Peter and Annie fucking hashed it out. Like, I sat there the entire time and I understood Annie's pain and frustration, but I also defended Peter. Like, I do believe that it is somewhat Annie's fault that Charlie is gone. Charlie didn't want to go. She completely said, I don't want to go to this party. I don't want to go to this party. Why couldn't you just let Peter go do his own thing? Now, instead, he has to babysit his 13-year-old sister. Both of them don't want her there. This isn't her scene. This isn't her thing. And then, unfortunate, for the family, because they don't know the powers that are really manipulating this. Unfortunately, she has an allergic reaction, and then just a crazy incident happens, and she ends up dying. How do you blame all that on Peter? How is that all his fault? Like, I do agree he shouldn't have been smoking weed with his friend, but seriously, he said he wanted to go have a get together with his friends. It was going to be a barbecue or something, or a picnic, I think he said. I forgot how he specifically phrased it. Why would you put that burden of babysitting on him? Like, that's not fair. So, I'm curious as to know where your stance is with that fight.
So my whole look at it is like, she doesn't necessarily blame Peter for what happened, because she admits that she's not really blaming him and that it was a free accident. It just kind of happened on his watch. But I see what you're saying where she forced Charlie to go, but it's kind of that situation where Charlie is like grieving very poorly and is really struggling with the death of a grandmother, where it's one of those situations where it's like, hey, you have to go distract yourself by doing something, where you can't just kind of sit around and mope. So I don't necessarily blame her for making her go to this party. I don't look at it as of like either one of them is to blame, but that whole dinner scene in general is like where everything starts to change, period. Like, that's where the real family tension between all of them is built. Like, the father has had enough at that point. Peter is just like completely terrified and scared of his mother, and his mom is just like so emotionally like overcome that like nothing fucking matters to her anymore. Like, she doesn't care about eating, she's not cooking, like she's totally oblivious as to what's going on. She's just making her diorama of the car crash at that point. Like, they're all just so like mentally and physically just like broken down and destroyed. Like, at that part is where they become their most vulnerable, and like that's when like Payment and all this shit like starts to attack and like start breaking them down piece by piece by piece. Like, but that point is like where it all comes to a head. Like, that's kind of like the climax for me. Like, at that moment is where things like, it's like, okay, now I can like jump into, like, Payment can jump into this and start manipulating things even more, because now they've all aired their grievances type deal, and they're all so vulnerable and like hurt with each other and destroyed that like everyone's just a shell of a person at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he literally just said everything I was going to say about that scene too. The scene is just literally the boiling point of the movie. Right as soon as that happens, and everybody kind of releases all this built up aggression they have towards each other. That's where Payment's able to start sinking his claws into everybody and start making things really, fall into place. Peter was right, though. It is Annie's fault for sending Charlie to the party with him. I agree with him on that. But I also agree with Annie, where she was just trying to be a good mother. She didn't think any of that shit was going down. She didn't know they were actually going to a house party and not some barbecue. She was just trying to be a good mother and let Charlie go, and get out of the house and try to make friends and try to, not be so depressed about Ellen passing, her grandmother. So, but if Annie would have just listened to Charlie when she said, I don't want to go, instead of kind of like snapping at her and being like, no, you need to go make friends, none of that probably would have happened.
Right.
So when it comes down to it, it's like almost everybody's at fault, because if Peter was a little more attentive to his sister and not trying to, get some poon, she wouldn't have went and eaten the cake, or, he would have been able to get her out of there faster. Also, one thing I didn't understand is if she has a peanut allergy, where's her, what is the medicine called?
The EpiPen.
Yeah, the EpiPen. Why didn't he have any of those on him?
I was literally just going to say that same exact thing.
Like why
someone has an allergy that badly, why aren't they carrying an EpiPen?
Yeah. Like,
why didn't he call 911?
Not bringing that? Why wasn't that in there? Why didn't they keep some? Why don't they have a backup of that? If they would have had that, guess what? He would have been able to just give her to that and maybe just not casually drove her to the hospital without her dying in the back seat.
And it's not like they're a poor family. Like, they can obviously afford it. Like, they have a super lavish house and shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking that same thing. Like, why the fuck doesn't she carry an EpiPen if her allergy's that bad?
Mm-hmm. Why not have the thing that'll literally save your life if you accidentally eat something with a peanut in it?
Right.
So that scene with them arguing with each other, basically everybody's at fault. There's not a single person that's at fault, but that scene is definitely the boiling point of the movie that allowed, everybody to finally have their walls completely broken down and allow for an easy access for payment to kind of start coming in and manipulating everybody.
It was probably the one and only scene that I actually felt and like was sympathetic towards Peter.
Mm-hmm.
That's about it. I mean, I guess when Annie's in like his room and she's basically like, I never wanted you or whatever. I guess I understood, that's not something you say to your kid either. But like, just on the emotional level, I was just like, what the fuck, man? Get off his dick. Like, hasn't he suffered enough? But
well, that scene where she's in his room telling him she didn't want him and everything, she was dreaming that. That didn't actually happen.
Right.
So, but when I first watched it and I didn't know that's what was happening, I thought she literally woke up and was straight talking shit to her son.
Right.
I was like, God damn, woman. Like, I wanted you to die. I almost aborted you. I did everything I could, but still here you are. And I was just like, Jesus Christ. Like, I mean, I get it. You're angry at him, but like, fuck.
Yeah.
But remember, too, at that point, she's like, it's not that I wanted you to die. I was trying to save you. Mm-hmm. Almost like she kind of knew, like, what was inevitable, that, like, her mother was going to try to do this shit to him, too.
Yeah.
Like, almost like once she found out he was a boy, she was like, uh-oh, I should, save this kid before he's born and my mom can attempt to do the same shit she did to her brother, basically.
Yeah, that whole dinner scene, that definitely was, and I think besides Charlie getting her head cut off, I think that was one of the other most intense scenes in the entire movie. Just because everybody in that entire scene showed such raw emotion and raw talent. Like, one of the things that I love about it, and I thought it was a little corny when I first watched it, but then I kind of realized, like, when you're in those fits of emotion that sometimes you can slip. When Annie's yelling at Peter about him having a smug face on his face, and she goes, "You have that fucking face on your face."
Yeah.
Like, I kind of hearing what she's saying. She's like, "It doesn't make sense," but she kept going with it because she was just that angry. That was some grade A acting, in my opinion. One scene that I would love to bring up with you guys is the part where Peter bashes his face into his desk. How'd you guys feel about that? Because I thought that was probably before the ending scene, that was probably the last incredibly tense and just insane scenes to watch. Just because the way, was this Alex Smith or Alex Williams or something? What's his name? Alex Wolf. His acting in that scene was just ridiculous. Just being able to contort his face and cause that much stress to look like it's on his face, and to be able to just do all that tense work and smash his face in and then fall back and just start screaming.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was just incredible. I don't know if you guys saw the video where people had the script scrolling underneath it, where they're showing that scene and how it was supposed to be broken down and how he basically acted it out to a T. Yeah, I thought that was an impressive scene, but I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that. See what you guys.
I mean, I thought that it was his like MO perfectly. Like, just I being emotional, not knowing what's going on, and then his like scream and all that stuff, and just like how everybody's like, "What the fuck is going on with this dude?" Like the classroom's reaction was probably our reaction. Like, what the fuck, man? What is it now? What could possibly be going on? So I mean, that's how I saw it. That's how I saw all of his scenes. after Charlie's death. Like, oh, what now? Like when he's under the bleachers smoking weed, and he's like, oh, I'm having a panic attack. It's like, oh God, oh Jesus Christ, Peter needs help again. Like, but I will say, and I do give credit, although he was so vulnerable and so weak and so emotional, I don't think that it was in an annoying way. I don't think it was obnoxious. You get some characters and you're just like, oh my fucking God, just die. Just kill them off. What are they still doing? Quit bitching. But with Peter, like every time it was like, oh man, what now? You okay, bud? Like you doing you gonna make it? I mean, so I personally completely attached to Peter with this whole movie. Not with, you know, being weak, because, you know, nothing like that, but just like, you know, not to get weird or anything like that, but growing up, like I had weird mom issues as well. So I kind of like when Annie would give him the cold shoulder and stuff like that, or was nasty to him or rude to him, I kind of gravitated towards him because I'm like, yeah, man, join the club, brother. But every time something bad would happen, I'd be like, oh God damn it, Peter, like you look like such a bitch, but you know, I do feel bad for you because you lost your sister. You have a mom who is being nasty to you in a time where you shouldn't be nasty to your 16-year-old son. Poor Steve was stuck in the middle of all of this. Like, I think that Steve was the most innocent and probably got the worst of everything in this movie. And I know that sounds dumb, but just losing your daughter, being in between your son, who as a parent you want to nurture and take care of, but also feeling like, well, you know, this is somewhat your fault, you weren't responsible, but have your wife be on like some fucking other planet and be crazy. Like, poor Steve, man. His acting, he was absolutely incredible through this movie. I think that he was probably Peter won, but Steve a very close second, the most sympathetic of the characters. I know that I completely kind of took that in a direction that you didn't want to go. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's fine. What's actually funny is I have a note written down here, and I was like, "Rest in peace, Steve. He didn't do shit."
Yes.
All he tried to do is be a good dad.
Yeah.
The entire movie, that's all he tried to do. You know, the opening scene, being a good dad, getting everybody ready for the funeral while the mom's just sitting in the car. Whole rest of the movie, picking Peter up from school when he's having a panic attack. You know, picking him up when he broke his nose, trying to talk Annie down, taking care of the funeral arrangements, doing all this. Steve didn't do shit, and he deserved better. That's the moral of the story. Steve deserved better.
Right.
He didn't deserve to be lit on fire like that. He didn't deserve any of that shit.
And that's something, too, that I'm curious about, but go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, before we get too far away from that skull bashing scene of Peter, it was interesting because like the first time I saw it, you know, obviously it's just like a huge shock factor scene. You're just like, oh, what the fuck is going on? You know, but you don't really think a whole lot of it. It just seems like really strange. You know, he throws his arm in the air and he's like kinking his face, and he just like bashes his head and he wakes up. So I was like, okay, whatever. It's just really intense. So, you know, at the end of the movie, I was looking up because, like, you know, there was all the beheadings. So I was just like, what's the deal with all the headless shit in Hereditary? And I stumbled on somebody talking about that scene, and it was mentioning that when he kicks his arm up like that and he's like hitting his head and he's bashing it, apparently that's his body positioning it in the way that Charlie died.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently when Charlie's body died, that was the position it was in, with its arm kicked up and then obviously bashing the head. So like once I heard that and read that, I was like, oh shit, it's almost like that's like Payman's kind of first attempt of like trying to take Peter's body, because like he kicks the body into the shape when, if we will, when Payman died in his former host, but then like the head bashes and Peter like kind of snaps out of it and like becomes himself again. But like from that point on, he's like really fucked up and worn out and just kind of done. So I thought that was interesting because I didn't, you know, you don't really after you see Charlie's head just like swing, you don't really see the body ever again. The only thing you ever see, and I don't know if either of you guys picked up on this too, is like you see Annie making the diorama and she's painting the blood on, and Steve's like, you know, what are you doing? Oh my God. And you see there's the little head there.
Mm-hmm.
She's painting the blood. I don't know if you noticed later on, they come back to that diorama. The little headpiece is gone. It's not there anymore.
I didn't pick up on that.
And then shortly after is when you see the head on the statue in the treehouse. But I remember like seeing it and I was like, the head's not there anymore. So it's almost like a foreshadowing that like someone has the head of the body like floating around somewhere. I know it's kind of off track, but
no, that was actually going to be my next point I wanted to bring up. Was not something we have to get too in detail about, but the pigeon at the beginning that smashes into the window and Charlie cuts the head off, that pigeon basically represents Charlie throughout the whole rest of the movie. The last drawing in her sketchbook was the pigeon with the crown on it, the pigeon head with the crown on it. If you go to the scene where you're in Joanne's apartment right before everything starts hitting the fan, and right before she goes and tells Peter she expels him and all that other bullshit she says, if you look closely on the table, you can see that pigeon head with the crown on top of a statue that's in the same position that Payman's in, with the little figurines bowing down in front of it like they were at the end of the movie there. So that pigeon basically is a representation of Charlie throughout the whole movie. That's just something that I picked up on my last watch through that I didn't know if any of you guys actually like noticed or caught on when you guys were watching it.
Yeah, I noticed that too. I even wrote in the beginning when I was first watching it, I was like, I still don't really necessarily understand her cutting the bird's head off. And then I said, although it does end up going head for a head, like she cut the pigeon's head off and then loses hers. But then, yeah, you see like that same setup on the nightstand of like, you know, the people praising the thing. I guess I'd have to look more into like why, like what the symbol of the bird, like what a bird really has to do with it all. I guess that's the one thing that like I'm not connecting. But
I know I didn't really look too far into that, but I chalked that up to because, like, you know, some movies where they talk about demonic possession, birds hitting the windows and hitting houses and stuff. I kind of had a feeling that had something to do with it, but I never really thought too far into it. I just thought that the pigeon was there to kind of just be a representation of Charlie after she had died.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, but I'm sure there's some sort of reason why it was chosen to be a bird or specifically a pigeon or something. I'm sure there's some more in-depth decision making there. I personally just don't know what the hell it is right now. Because like I don't know if I've ever told. I know Sean's heard me say this shit, and so has Tyler, but I don't know if I've ever mentioned it in your presence. And I'm sure Sean knows exactly what I'm going to say. Is that like every decision that's made and everything that happens in a movie was kind of done on purpose. Like if you see something in the background, like it was 99% of the time strategically put there and is there for a reason. It's like the way I look at things is like, oh, if this was a pigeon and a bird, there must have been some conscious choice to make it that.
Mm-hmm.
But like obviously we can't answer all the questions. But yeah, that's you. I'm sure you'll hear me say that a lot of like some things were done for a reason. And it's just a matter of uncovering what the hell the reason is.
Putting your education to good use.
Yeah. Like I said, Sean's heard me say that line plenty of fucking times.
Well, the thing about the pigeon too that I found that was really cool is, you know, she goes down and she secretly cuts the head off, and then she like puts the head in her pocket and walks away. And then, as you alluded to, you know, her head got cut off and then somebody picked it up and then carried it away. So I mean, it's literally like the actions that happen in one part of the movie are literally, the roles are just reversed and redone in the later part of the movie. And I feel like he does that just like a few times, but very casually.
And now that you say that, it makes me think back to what you said earlier about Payman being able to see things from the past and project images of the future. if you kind of think about it that way, that whole opening part of her cutting off the head and it hitting the window and her making the statue is just projecting images of the future of the movie kind of deal. Right. Which then also goes back to the whole thing being a diorama and like being staged.
Right.
Like the whole thing, it's like this staged creation for us, and we're seeing it all happen before it actually happens.
I'd like to know how, like, because he seems powerful in Charlie. So I'd like to, I mean, obviously we'll never know, but I am just curious, like in Ari Aster's mind while he did this, like how much power does Payman have? And like when he goes to Peter and his like potential is unlocked and he's finally the all-powerful, like, because he did some shit. So if he was able to manipulate everything that we saw plus some, then what the fuck does he do now? Like, maybe that's just supposed to be left up to our imagination, and that's what the true horror is. Like, hey, if he did this with this much, imagine what he can do now. But that's one thing that I'm just generally curious about. Like, what now is he able to do? Because I mean, what the fuck, man? This guy, Payman's an asshole.
Well, it's not like most movies where they have a game plan. This whole thing's just about him getting into a person, not what he's going to do once he's in a person.
Right.
I think something we would have to look into for that is like what happens when a king of hell is resurrected and is in a host's body. Like what happens with that?
Yeah.
You know, is it like something that brings forth the apocalypse? Is it something where he needs to get his other fellow brothers into bodies, or like what is it? Or is it just he's just there and he's just going to live a life out in Peter's body and be this all-powerful being that just gets whatever the hell he wants? Like, well, what is his purpose?
Did the cult ever have a name?
No, I don't think so.
Because I know that I wanted to look up like a cult's name, but I never personally could see if it was in the books or the memoirs or anything like that. Because maybe if it's a real cult or the name has significance, maybe that would be able to tell us what their end goal is or what their ideas are.
Yeah.
Other than killing people and resurrecting bodies. But
one note I did find cool about this movie was I like how Ari Aster didn't go the typical like, oh, we got to resurrect, Lucifer. He went with a different god. He's like, one thing I read is he said, like, I was just tired of the whole stigma of it having to have to be Satan. Like, why don't we do something else?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we focus on some other type of demon? That's why he went with Payman, which I thought was actually really cool. It's like, all right, cool, breaking the norm, getting away from the whole Satan thing, because that's been done 1.5 million times.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a cool little note that I found. All right, we just broke an hour on this recording. Let's get our final thoughts on, guys. What do you think? What was your final review, and what do you give it? Justin, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, before I do it, there was just like two little points I wanted to make still. One of them is actually just kind of a funny point that some people have been tying this and saying that Ari Aster has an overall universe. I don't know if you guys have heard this.
Yeah, I heard that before.
Specifically about the scene where Annie's walking out of the paint store. There's supposedly Danny and Christian walking into the art store right behind her, or at least two characters that look almost identical to them, like a short girl with a blonde ponytail and a guy a little bit taller with a beard. So like a lot of people like to signal that out, like, hey, maybe that's those characters from Midsommar, and he's just like toying, that this whole thing is connected. But just a little kind of fun fact thing that I remember hearing, and then I saw it, and I was like, oh shit, it actually does look like them. And then the other last thing is I want to point out too, which is kind of goes with that whole like my studies of everything. It's like it's really cool if you go back and watch, like when all the scenes where Peter's in the classroom, everything that like the teacher is saying and like teaching the class is all the shit that's going to happen to Peter, basically. Like you see towards the end of the board, it says punishment brings wisdom, where like Peter's going to go through all this shit and like be physically beaten and mentally beaten, but he's going to become Payman and gain all this wisdom and strength. And then earlier, the first time you see him in school, they're talking about how I can't remember what Greek character it was, but it's like how he's out of control and he has no choice of his actions, and like the whole time Peter's just on screen doodling or whatever, and then like the girl in front of him brings up how, oh, you know, so and so whatever, he's just ignoring all the signs in front of him. And I was like, oh, it's really interesting how all these classroom teachings are basically all the shit that like is happening and is going to happen to Peter throughout the whole film. So that was just a little like insight thing. Like I personally, when I watch things now, I find myself less focusing on like what you see and what's directly there as much as I am like the background shit and like the other stuff you're not necessarily supposed to kind of be focusing it on. And then you find like cool little tidbits like that. Like I did the same thing in the Veronica episode with the music playing and that kind of shit. Yeah, just a cool little thing I wanted to point out. But I'll get into my final thoughts now. Basically, is like we mentioned, it's an extremely heavy movie, and that there's so many strong emotional moments. Like you feel the tension and anxiety like that this family's going through, and then it's almost like less of a horror movie as it is like a really horrific movie. Like it's a drama that's just like horrifying to watch and deal with, like all the family death and just like all the raw emotion that they like, specifically the scene of where Annie's like just breaking down crying after Charlie dies, and how she's just saying how she just wants to die and she can't handle it. Just like it's just like really fucking like gives you dread watching that, like how real that actually is. Like people actually go through that shit. Like this happens to people and this is real. So it's just like, man, like thinking of it that way is like, man, like this shit is so heavy handed, like emotionally, that like you don't want to watch it as much as you do, just because like you just feel weird watching it. Like a movie shouldn't make you feel this bad, like this bad. But it's cool. It's interesting that it really invokes that out of you. And then like it's cool that like this, I personally thought I enjoyed how confusing it gets at times, and like requires you to watch it over and over and over again. And like you can watch it as many times as you want and still come up with different explanations or reasons for things happening. Like you could think one thing and then you watch it and pick up a different detail and you're like, oh shit, like maybe, like Sean mentioned, you know, after looking up Payman and you realize he can project these images, you're like, oh, well, fuck, did this happen? Did it not happen? Like you can watch it as many times as you want and come up with so many different thoughts and ideas. And I think that's cool because it's, you know, you want to be able to watch a movie and like enjoy it and keep learning from it, as opposed to like watching something, figuring it out, and then you never watch it again because it's just cut and dry. You know what you're doing. At least in my opinion, that's kind of how I look at it. And I think it's a good quality of this movie for how like up in the air things are, and you actually thinking about what's really going on, like what's real and what's not. The one like real kind of negative I'll say is it does kind of feel like it gets rushed at the end when they start throwing in all the horror, like the real horror aspects, like, you know, Annie stabbing herself in the throat, Steven being lit on fire, like all that stuff like feels like it went from 0 to 60 like really, really quickly. And they're like, oh fuck, we got to throw all this shit in at the end. But other than that, like it's really good. I think if Toni Collette wasn't Annie in this movie, it would feel really different. Like she clearly steals the show and really is the core of this movie. And I think if they cast anyone else, it may not have really hit as well as it did. But other than that, I don't really have any specific points. It's just really fucking good. And I love watching it. And I think my overall rating, I ended up giving it an 8, which so far has been the highest rating I've given anything.
Wow, nice. Sean, let's hear your shitty review because I know it's going to be bad. Let's go.
So, you know, the caveat with me is, like I was explaining, I'm not really a supernatural horror movie lover. I just feel like there's just excuses and just things can get thrown away and all that. And the first couple of times that I watched this movie, I was just kind of like, it seems like there's so much shit and it's so jumbled, and like, you know, I'm a very fact-based person, very even it out, like let's get it done, ABC, black and white. And this movie is completely everything opposite of what I generally go to watch and, you know, how my personality is based. But I will say, after watching this movie a few times, letting it go, not watching it, not thinking about it, not doing anything, watching it again, doing a little bit of research as into, you know, who Payman is and understanding, you know, certain family trauma. The movie that I watched when this first came out compared to the movie that we watched or that I watched this week, to me, is two different things. This definitely isn't a one-watch movie, and that's okay. Especially because that seems to be how movies are coming out nowadays. There's a lot of art, there's a lot of subtle things, hidden things that makes you think, and that's really cool, you know. I really appreciate that opening scene so much now because I feel like it applies to all of our world. We can only see what's in front of us, but that's not the only thing that's happening, and that's really cool to me. I appreciate that Annie is going through such heartbreak and trauma, and when she's on screen, you almost feel sad. You almost feel a sense of urgency, like, you know, we need to figure this out. You know, was she wrong for her relationship with her mom? And then when everything happens with Charlie, now you're sympathetic because you're like, well, you know, was I a good daughter? Well, now was I a good enough mother? Is this my fault? Is this not my fault? I lost two of my family members. When Peter's on screen, you're just like, oh my God, like this is just a 16-year-old kid and he's just trying to live his life. And, you know, he got hit with his grandmother passing away, which he seemed to be okay. He didn't really seem to take it to heart or be completely, you know, in crumbles about it. But when his sister died, like you could definitely tell that there was some sort of change in him. And just how heavy that burden sits every time he's on screen, you just wait for him to break. And that's not necessarily a good thing, but it's something that you expect. The whole Charlie scene, we talked about it, and I do say I think that there are things that could have been easily fixed. You know, the EpiPen, maybe calling 911, an ambulance, calling your parents. I don't want to hear some bullshit excuse. Oh, well, he didn't want to get in trouble. If you're bringing her to the hospital, your parents are going to find out. So for him to just be rushing, thinking he's going to save the day and take care of it by himself, I think is silly. But on the opposite hand, it is a 16-year-old boy. When I was 16, I didn't think the same way that I think as I'm 28. So, and that's the part that I appreciate about this movie, is as we sit here and we watch it in our little screen, we can go, well, this, well, this, well, this. But that's not all that's happening. And that's what's really awesome about Payman and him knowing the past, knowing the future, you kind of understanding that the things that you're seeing are actually going to happen again, but you don't realize it or you don't know it. I will say personally, a flaw for me, and it continues to be a flaw, although I do respect both of your answers, is I really didn't like the whole Payman having to be Peter thing. And I wasn't really a fan of the possession process or how it happened. It wasn't for me. It wasn't my cup of tea. I will say, though, that I almost disagree with you slightly, Justin, because that ending, when it goes from 0 to 60, I liked that. Because I felt like this was such a slow burn movie, and then you just get punched in the fucking face. And that's exactly how the characters were. The character, I mean, Peter's running around the house like, what the fuck just happened? Holy shit. I broke my nose. My fucking dad's on fire in the living room. My mom's fucking Spider-Man crawling on the ceiling and the walls. Like, this movie made you feel how these characters are feeling. It made you feel his anxiety with Charlie. It made you feel Annie's pain. It made you feel like, you know, when he's running around, I'm like, come on, brother, like, let's get this shit going. You need to run. So I did appreciate that. I did appreciate it. But I will say that I didn't. Maybe I'll just watch it again, having this discussion. But the very end, the way he just jumps out the window and then, you know, the light flashes over and now he's fully possessed. I wasn't a full fan of that. But like I said, I'll give it another watch again. Overall, I'll probably say that this movie was a 7 for me. And that's crazy because I don't like this type of shit. But again, when I first watched this movie, it was about a 4 for me. But the movie that I watched this week is a completely different movie, like I said.
Sean, I think that's your highest rated movie ever.
It is.
I'm genuinely surprised by that rating.
But I don't know why you're surprised. Like, there's nothing that I've said today that has been nasty or terrible or shitty. Like, I've generally said this is a good movie. There's just flaws that I feel sit in there.
No, I'm not really surprised. Or as Tyler would say, it was like, wow, Sean, I'm surprised your scale went that high or something. Yeah. You know, shit Tyler would say to you, like, wow, holy fuck. No, I mean, if any movie was going to get it out of you, I'm not surprised it's this one.
Yeah, I was thinking you were going to give it like a 5 or a 6 at most, to be completely honest with you.
I mean, a 6 probably was going to be my goal, but having this discussion and having, like, my thoughts and flaws get ironed out and hearing your guys', you know, your perspectives and some things that I necessarily didn't notice or see or think kind of bumped it up. But you know, I mean, like I said, there's definitely flaws in it. I didn't like everything about it, and I've said that, but I can't take away from, well, I will say too, I don't think that this is a horror. I feel like this is a trauma movie. And that really, I mean, the last 15 minutes is fucking horrific. But I just, you know, I appreciate how like I've said 5 times now, every time there's a character on screen, the movie shifts so you feel what that character is feeling. Like, that's really fucking hard to do, and they deserve credit for how they did this. Toni Collette knocked this shit out of the park. Like, she doesn't have to do another thing, and this was absolutely untouchable performance. Absolutely.
No, I agree with you on that. I'd have to say my final review would be, unlike you, I actually genuinely enjoy more supernatural movies. One thing that always gets my anxiety going is the fear of the unknown. And I feel like when it comes to demonology and ghosts, you just don't know. You don't know what that shit. So that generates more emotion inside of me when I'm watching these movies. And with this movie in particular, they did an absolute fantastic job doing everything to create emotion. When it comes to that opening scene where you could feel the grief of the family after Ellen died, to the part where Charlie dies, and you just feel everybody's, you know, starting to get all tense, to that final moment in the movie where everybody's just, you know, like you said, running around like, what the fuck is going on? The part where Annie, you know, I gotta mention this part too while it's in my mind. The part where Annie is like, when Peter gets up into the attic and shuts the door, and Annie's like on the ceiling just fucking banging her head into the door. That part to me was like probably one of the craziest scenes in any movie that I've ever seen. I've never seen a demon movie where they had somebody just doing some shit like that, just out of nowhere. You know, because it's just a quick scene and you just see her just repeatedly bashing her head into the fucking door. And that just, to me, that created like a sense of like, holy shit, you know, this is some crazy stuff. The acting in it was absolutely superb. I felt like just about everybody across the board killed it in this movie. Even, you know, the short-lived Charlie, you know, her actor, I think that was like one of her very few acting roles that she's had, or the only acting role she's had, I'm not sure. But she did, you know, she played Charlie very well. Alex Wolff, I think he probably put on the best performance in the movie. And then just everybody throughout the whole movie was just so good. And like you said, when them transitioning between characters, and you could feel the different tenseness, like when they would go to Steve, you'd feel a little less tenseness, more worry than you would feel with like Annie, who you just feel sad, and you know, you just kind of feel bad for her. And then you go to Peter and you just feel this uneasiness right after Charlie dies there. Them switching between that, I thought they did a really great job. Ari Aster, I think he directs some beautifully stunning movies, visually, and just the way he structures everything. my only real complaints on the movie is I do wish that some of the characters had a little more common sense. You know, per se, Peter with the whole chocolate thing, the chocolate cake thing. Like, there should have been a little more common sense there to, ask that question, and then, like we discussed with the EpiPen, and why didn't he, I guess, I understand he was panicking, but like in a panic state, you still would think, oh shit, she could die. Let me try to get some professional help and call an ambulance to come here. She probably would have lived if an ambulance got there in time. So minus the common sense part and certain things, not being fully explained. Those are my only real issues with it. If I had to give this movie a number, it'd probably be I'd give it a 9, just because of how everything went throughout the whole movie and how well it was directed, and how Ari Aster perfectly captured his vision of how he wanted this movie to come out. I just thought he did such a great job on it, and it's like you said, it is a trauma movie. It's like a dramatic, stressful, dramatic movie, and then the last minute it just fucking smacks you in the face with some shit that you've never seen before in any movie. I've never seen a final scene like that, like the last 15 minutes of the movie. I don't know about you, but I watch a lot of horror movies, and I've never seen anything quite as like crazy and played out as that final scene was in this movie. All right, well, all right. That was our final thoughts. We're going to get into our poll here. Justin, what was your movie?
So I'm going to, even though Ginger Snaps wasn't chosen and I have that one ready, I'll bring it back another time. But in lieu of the release of the trailer of a new remake, I'm going to go with the original Candyman.
Very nice. Sean, what do you got for us?
Well, because you fuckers didn't pick my old movie, which is a bunch of bullshit, I was going to go with Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. However, in light of this supernatural trend, I will now put up my favorite supernatural movie, Sinister.
Ooh. Do we want to do an episode with both of them? Because I love both of them.
Whoever picks. Whoever wins, yeah.
I'm going to go old school with this. I know this movie's probably a movie a lot of people have seen but kind of just passed over because of the name. But I'm going to go with Pumpkinhead.
I'm gonna go ahead and put this prediction out because the poll will be over before anyone probably sees this episode anyway. I bet you Sean wins this one. I bet you Sinister gets picked. I'm
betting too. That's a very good pick. I generally enjoy both those movies, so I'd actually be excited to do that. So, all right, guys. Well, that has been our episode for this week. Hereditary won the poll, and this week we'll have our new one up here soon. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll catch you next time.